warm welcome to Personal Finance. I'm Kukuletu Cele. February is known as Cupid's month, synonymous with red roses, but it's also the month during which many people choose to get divorced. Henry van Deventer, Head of Wealth Development at Old Mutual Wealth, and Christelle Fourie, MD of MUA Insurance, joins us now for a look at how to get your affairs in order when facing such a major financial transformation. Good to have you with us, lady and gent, this evening. Henry, maybe let's start off with you. I take it one needs to go back, obviously, once you're at the process of getting divorced or even reach separation, to look back at the type of marriage contract that you have.
Absolutely, Gugu. I mean, that's certainly where it all starts. And I think so many of us, when we get married at a fairly young age, we don't really understand the long-term consequences of the marital property regime that we choose to enter into. If we look at the impact of divorce on money, it pretty much all starts there. So the basics you want to know is there are three forms of marriage that you can enter into. The one is a normal sort of marriage in community of property, which means that all the assets you had before you got married and all the assets you accumulate after you got married gets split down the middle. The second type is ANC, anti-nuptial contract with accrual. So that means everything you had before you got married, mine remains mine and yours remains yours, but everything we grew together after we got married gets split into should we get divorced. And then the third form of marital contract is just ANC without accrual. That means before and after marriage, what's mine is mine and what's yours is yours. So should we get divorced, there's no real issue there. So I mean, from a taxation perspective, that's absolutely great to get married without accrual. But of course, there are bigger issues, such as one of the spouses perhaps taking a backseat in terms of their careers to look after the family, etc. And the bottom line impact of that is, if you are married with accrual or in community of property, should you get divorced, whatever the growth, the capital gain, the appreciation on those assets are, that needs to get split. Often homes need to get sold, capital gains tax is payable. So there's a whole bunch of tax consequences that will happen if you fall into one of those two categories.
How then do you get a divorced couple or a couple that is planning to divorce to actually sit down and talk about the finances appropriately? Because by that time of the relationship, I'm sure you don't even want to be in the same room together.
I'm laughing because with my legal background, it's amazing how ugly that sometimes becomes. Although that's not always the case. The kind of ground that you want to cover is, should you go through a process of divorce, you look at a global rand amount of whatever your joint estate is worth that will get split. And in terms of rand amounts, you want to split that, but that doesn't mean every single asset needs to get split down the middle. By the way, that includes stuff like your retirement funds and pension funds. There's some pretty significant assets that people tend to forget about. So as long as you can agree on what the rand amount is, if that means that one spouse sort of retains the home and another one maybe gets more of the pension funds, etc., that's absolutely fine. The one catch is this. Where there are assets that are owned in your joint names, and typically that happens with a home, what's going to happen when one person gives up their ownership of that half of the asset, it is deemed a taxable event, and you pay capital gains tax and property transfer taxes, etc., come into play. So that can be quite a significant financial event.
It's significant indeed. And Christelle, maybe it's time we bring you into the conversation because to highlight again the ownership of assets, especially when it comes to insurances and the cover that is needed there. Does it depend in whose name the assets are actually insured, or does it go back to the ownership issue, or again, 2 steps back, the actual marriage contract?
Well, how it actually comes about, who takes what following a divorce is really not the issue that I think we want to discuss. What we find is when there's a divorce, you add insurance, which is already a grudge purchase, to the situation, and you find that clients end up in very, very fraudful situations. So often we find partners that are not getting along anymore are responsible for payment of premium of the policy, for instance, or there's a theft of items by the one partner from the other partner's property. And then we don't know who owns what. You can't claim from yourself, and this is a very important aspect of an insurance policy. If you, as the main policyholder, have someone living in your property and they move out and they take items with them, you can't actually claim against your insurance policy for those items going out because the person leaving the property is also deemed the policyholder. So it's incredibly important to sit down, just as Henry said now, and decide where the assets go and then to split the insurance and make sure that the policy holders are separate and that the policyholder takes ownership of payment of those premiums, and that there's a clear understanding of who is responsible for what.
But then the big question is, again, when it comes to those certain assets, how do you split up what's whose? And more importantly, when it comes to individual insurance cover, does it necessarily mean higher risk and higher premiums? At what cost does this come at for this now separated couple?
It doesn't actually translate into a higher premium. You know, your risk profile will be determined by your claims history, and that will follow the person taking up a separate policy. You know, the fact of splitting the insurance policies, it's so important. We also find that if you have one broker involved on both policies, that, you know, it also adds to the stress of the possible situation. You know, with the high net worth markets, the assets that need to be, you know, that are being split up can be vast. And with that comes very, very big challenges. So you need a broker to actually sit down with you, just as Henry said now, and actually go through the challenges of your insurance policy and make sure that everyone understands where the assets are insured. Often we find people don't communicate anymore, so the one assumes the other one is insuring the car. We find that the person responsible for paying the premiums might just stop paying the premiums because they're upset with the ex-partner, and unknowingly the ex-partner is without insurance cover altogether. We find that people come forward with fraudulent claims that were submitted during the course of their marriage. And because there's stress at the time of the divorce, they come to us. We've had a number of cases like that, where the husband or wife comes and says, well, they submitted a fraudulent claim, and it's been followed, you know, then obviously by a police case. So be very careful when it comes to divorce, and make sure that your affairs are in order.
Henry, if we come to you, you want to add to that actually quite briefly.
Yes, actually, because policies can be incredibly sticky. And when we think about policies, as Christelle quite rightly says, not only are there the insurance issues, there are also the beneficiary issues. Now, there are two sorts of policies probably that you're going to have when you're married. The one is the insurance stuff, so life insurances, etc., and short-term insurance as well. And the other is investment policies, stuff like endowment policies, retirement annuities, all those sorts of things. So here's a kind of a tricky thing that sometimes happens. People get divorced. Because there's so much stuff going on, one of the things that they forget to do is they forget to change the underlying beneficiaries of those policies. Because usually when you're married, you know, something happens to me, it goes to my wife. Something happens to her, it comes to me. And people get divorced, and they may change in terms of their new will where that money is going to change, but they forget about the beneficiaries. What they don't realize is this. The nominated beneficiaries supersede your will. So if I'm married to a new spouse, yeah, in terms of my will, they get the proceeds of a policy. If the beneficiaries are still my former spouse, that's where the money's going to go.
Absolutely no recourse?
No, yeah, it's absolutely horrible. So you have to remember to change those beneficiaries. It's critically important.
And I take it that applies across the board as well. You also mentioned retirement annuities.
Absolutely,
and pension
retirement
funds.
annuities, endowment policies, anything with a nominated beneficiary. And you know, with tax-free savings accounts coming into effect on the 1st of March, you know, you can choose to have that as an endowment. The same rule applies. It is critically important. If you do get divorced, change your beneficiaries, otherwise your ex will get the money.
Exactly. Let's touch on investment and savings accounts as well, because that also can be quite a nitty-gritty issue when it comes to couples who reach separation. Again, does it go into whose name it is and how you actually split up the assets according to what partner gets what?
That's a very good place to start. I mean, if you're going to look at investment and savings accounts, they tend to not be made in joint names. Again, for tax reasons, that often makes sense. It's easier to stay on top of who gets what exemption, who gets what benefit. So that's not really an issue. It will become an issue when there's a massive sense or massive lack of balance between one spouse having significantly more assets than the other spouse. So if that is going to be the case, essentially what's going to happen is the portion of the assets that will get cashed in and transferred typically will incur capital gains tax. So that's not ideally something you want to do. A point I want to come back to earlier on, though, in your own investment accounts, if they balance out, not really much of an issue. But the one of property ownership You know, because we get married and we love each other. You know, I hate to sound cynical in saying this, but sometimes things don't work out. So maybe of the kind of things you want to consider when you buy that property, it's maybe not doing it in joint names and in your anti-marital contract, stipulating how you would have those assets dealt with in case of divorce. But investments, as long as you're happy to understand that you will pay the capital gains tax, and that it will be a taxable event cashing the portion, that is something that's going to happen. So a rule of thumb is if capital gains tax averages out at 13% odd, realize that when you're planning for your divorce, when it comes to the investments, strip out the capital gains tax first, and then you've got a more realistic number to work with.
Exactly, and that's an element that I think a lot of people fail to remember, the tax. Instead, we're looking at the money that we're looking to protect and gain.
Absolutely.
But Christelle, if we can rope you in here just to get your closing thoughts and remarks. If it does happen that maybe your insurance cover or policy is not updated and the worst case scenario actually happens where the insured party actually passes away, what does that do to the claims of the remaining spouse despite them being divorced?
You know, it's difficult to say because each case gets looked at on its own merits. We subscribe to treating customers fairly, so we will always try and find reasons to pay a claim, and that's, I can say, for most of the insurance market. I think just in closing, what I would like to say is if we often find that when there's a divorce, we have a lady or a female who's never really had to look after her own financial affairs, moves out and very distraught with emotion and don't take care of the important things. If you're getting divorced, make sure that your financial affairs are in order. Take control of your financial health, of your own life, and make sure that you tick all the boxes. Read your policy, check your endorsements, like Henry was saying about, reading the fine print in the policy. Make sure you understand who's allowed to drive the car, pay your premiums, and be in control of that aspect. It'll give you a great sense of satisfaction if you get that right.
It's so funny. The one thing that we always hear about married couples is that they need to communicate, but it sounds as though at the time of divorce, communication is so much more important to make sure that there aren't any loose ends that are left hanging.
Absolutely true.
Exactly. Henry, thank you so much for your time this evening. But that's it for Personal Finance tonight. It does come to an end here. Thanks once more to Henry van Deventer from Old Mutual Wealth and Christelle Fourie from MUA Insurance Acceptances. Remember that we'd love to hear from you, so you can tweet any of your comments and suggestions to @CNBC Africa using the hashtag Finance410 or to myself @Kukumfupi. Until next week, it's goodbye for now.